Hi Angels. This will be the chapter 11 of You Are My Heroes by Lavender Thoughts 21 on AO3. Bath time as predicted. Izuku didn't like bath time. The little boy refused to get in the water-filled tub, even with the inviting bubbles that Aizawa could have sworn were a reliable bait. Katsuki, on the other hand, entered the water with no hesitation, playing with the bubbles by making a beard on his face. Come on, Midoriya, don't you want to be clean? Aizawa asked, knowing that the boy hated the thought of being dirty. I don't want to be dirty. Izuku became distraught with the implication, but still eyed the tub with blatant contempt. Izuku shivered as another minute passed by without his clothes on. Kachan, Izuku whined, asking the blonde to help out. Maybe if he asked Bakugo, the man wouldn't make him plunge into the tub's abyss. But of course, Bakugo couldn't hear him. His hearing aids were out since they were not waterproof. Katsuki saw the distressed look on Izuku's face and reached out his hand, offering a helping hand. Izuku let out a final cold shudder before whimpering once more and grabbing Bakugo's hand. Slowly the boy sat down in the water, making sure to keep his back straight so his head didn't get wet. Katsuki made Aizawa anxious. Each time, the blonde would dive his head down and hold his breath. Midoriya seemed to relax as he counted the seconds between each of Bakugo's attempts. So cool, Kachan! Izuku exclaimed as the boy held his breath for almost half a minute, an extraordinary amount of time for a small child. Why don't you try, bud? Aizawa asked Izuku, who immediately frowned at the suggestion. Aizawa didn't push Midoriya further. The boy was tightening his fist at his sides and slowly rocking back and forth. If he continued, the boy could have a meltdown and have a negative experience to add to bathing. Bakugo, I need to wash your hair now, Aizawa said, even though Katsuki couldn't hear him. Instead, he tapped the boy on the shoulder, and the blonde gave him an angry sneer. Shampoo, Aizawa simply said, pumping some kid's shampoo from a bottle he bought earlier. At this, Katsuki relaxed his face and seemed to understand the silent instruction. Katsuki kept glaring at the man as he put the shampoo on his hair. It seemed like he was purposely not blinking. It was like Bakugo wanted to make sure Aizawa knew that he himself didn't trust him, not enough to close his eyes. Even when Aizawa rinsed Katsuki's hair, the boy didn't close his eyes. He just squinted at the man as the shampoo flowed off. Izuku played around with the bubbles. As he waited for Aizawa to finish up with Katsuki, he would grab a handful of bubbles and gently blow on them to send them flying. This continued until Aizawa had properly washed Bakugo's body with a red loofah and asked Midoriya permission to do the same to him. Seeing how Izuku hated water on his head, Aizawa opted to wash his body first to leave the worst part for last. Izuku quickly stood up for that part, glad to have an excuse to have his head farther away from the water. When Aizawa was finished, Izuku held some tears in his eyes, knowing that he had to wash his hair at some point. The boy was shaking in fear and gripping his fist tightly against his chest. Just play a bit longer, and then I'll wash your hair, Aizawa told Izuku, who immediately sighed in relief before sitting back down next to Katsuki. The boys played in the tub for a while longer, as Aizawa went to grab his phone. The man was trying to research a way around Izuku's problem with water on his head. As he headed back to the bathroom, he heard the boys playing more freely, splashing around more than they were under his watchful eye. Aizawa peeked around the corner and saw Katsuki smiling as he splashed water around, Izuku giggling as small droplets hit his face. That made it apparent that Izuku didn't hate water in his face. It was the thought of being submerged that bothered him. It was clear that the boys had more fun when he wasn't around, and it made Aizawa think that their past caregivers weren't too keen on them being rowdy. All Might? Bakugo's sudden shout surprised everyone. All Might where? Izuku's eyes lit up at the mention of their favorite hero. Katsuki just dipped his head back under the bubbles and quickly resurfaced. All Might drowning, Katsuki said quickly with a hint of urgency in his voice. No, not the number one hero. Izuku let out some giggles as he realized Bakugo was just pretending. Save him! Katsuki yelled out as he went underwater again, this time pretending that he was the drowning All Might. Aizawa had heard Bakugo speak, but this was a decent amount of sentences in a short time. Was it because he felt safe with Midoriya? All Might no! Izuku squealed in laughter as he desperately tried to grab Katsuki from the depths. The water shifted around as Bakugo threw himself around, gasping big fake breaths as Izuku tried to pull him up, until finally he dramatically let out a fake final breath and let himself drown in the water. Izuku plunged into the water after Katsuki, and to Aizawa's amazement, the green boy's hair was completely soaked, and Midoriya didn't even notice. His head was underwater for seconds at a time. Come on, Kachan, you're heavy, Izuku huffed as he raised the blonde above the water. Bakugo left his eyes closed, a fake look of death on his face. He was very dramatic during their hero plays. You okay, Bakugo? Aizawa asked loudly, knowing the boy was fine, but he felt like he was better safe than sorry. The boy opened his eyes, hearing the man despite the lack of his hearing aids. The boy wasn't completely deaf from his ears, so he heard when Aizawa spoke loud enough to be heard around the whole house. Katsuki let out a huff, reverting back to his grouchy self, who knew no fun. The rest of the bath time was easy with Izuku's hair damp. The man easily washed his hair without a peep of complaints. It was the rinsing that left him feeling defeated, because in order to do that, he needed to dump water over the boy's head. So instead, he tried to make a deal. "Okay, Izuku, I need to rinse your hair," Aizawa started, but the boy was already distraught. "But as soon as we finish, you get to have dinner." That's when the worst thing happened. Without warning, Bakugo lunged forward and forced Izuku underwater. It seemed that the blonde had heard the bargain and decided to take matters into his own hands. Bakugo. Aizawa's strict voice quickly made Katsuki flinch and let go of Midoriya, fear in his eyes as Aizawa's face held some anger. "No!" Izuku cried as he emerged from the water, his face red, as he started to scream at the betrayal of his friend. The boy coughed up some water, and by the way he was huffing, he got some water up his nose too. Violently, Izuku shook his head as he felt everything become too much for him. When that didn't work, he slapped the edge of the tub walls frantically as he stood up trying to launch himself off the ledge. Aizawa quickly grabbed him before the green boy could slip and hurt himself, but that only resulted in more ear-piercing screams. Just as fast as he grabbed him, Aizawa let go of the boy as he set him on the ground. The overwhelmed boy was now crying into the bath mat, smacking his fist on the ground at the unpleasant sensations. Aizawa draped a towel over the boy, knowing that once again the boy was beyond consoling. "Bakugo, that was very bad," Aizawa said loudly, but the blonde couldn't hear him over Izuku's yells. Katsuki slowly slipped his face under the water, leaving only his eyes glancing away from the scene he caused. Despite the attempt to hide his face, the bubbles were mostly dispersed by now, so his pout was clearly visible to Aizawa. Bakugo knew that he was in the wrong. It took Izuku a while to calm down, his loud screams turning into sobs and then silent whimpers. During that time, Aizawa unplugged the bath drain and watched Katsuki slowly emerge from the water. Aizawa dried Bakugo off and dressed him in some blue PJs with stars on them. "You okay, darling? Let's dry you off and get you some clothes," Aizawa offered when the Izuku peeked his head out from the towel. He was hugging himself and shivering from the cold. Izuku let himself be dried when he realized the towel that was thrown on him was an All Might-themed towel. The boy was awed at the colors as Aizawa hung it on the rack next to Bakugo's matching towel. He didn't want to risk them fighting over them. Katsuki waited in the corner, putting his hearing aids back in as Izuku pouted him. "Bakugo, say you're sorry," Aizawa said firmly as Izuku's eyes began to water at the sight of his betrayer. Katsuki also had a pout on his face. He knew his actions were bad, but now Izuku disliked him. At that thought, Bakugo's eyes began to fill with tears as well, so he looked away. "Kashen," Izuku whined as he realized Bakugo started to cry too. "Cha!" Bakugo clicked his tongue as he angrily wiped his tears away. He didn't want to face Midoriya. Katsuki started his apology, but it looked like he was talking to the wall. Katsuki stuttered and got stuck at the letter mem. "Spell out the word inside your head." Aizawa tried to help, but then he mentally slapped himself because of course the boy couldn't do that. Bakugo was only 3. He didn't know how to read or write. "Just slowly think of what you want to say before you say it," Aizawa offered instead, which Katsuki had. Katsuki said, clearly taking a second to breathe and calm down before the final word. "Sorry." "I'm sorry." Katsuki combined the words into one sentence before turning back to Izuku. "Kachan!" Izuku whined as tears went down his cheeks. The boy still felt overwhelmed by the unpleasant experience. Despite Katsuki being the cause of his current misery, Izuku opened his arms for a hug. Bakugo let out a displeased huff, but wrapped his hands around Midoriya. The deep pressure from Bakugo's bare hug seemed to calm the boy down after a minute, since he started to relax in the blonde's arms. With that, bath time was over. This is the end of chapter 11. I'll see you in chapter 12. Have a good day, angels!